Outscored 33-10. Tatum fires away, pumps it in. 51.
You can't win alone. I can't win alone. Me and James, we just can't win alone. That's why basketball is played 5-on-5.
A few moments later.
So he just said, I just want to win a championship, whether it's in Philly or somewhere else.
Well, well, well. How the turntables.
Among NBA superstars currently, the biggest choker and playoff underperformer we have is Joel Embiid, the sympathy MVP. As so far 7 years in Philly, it's been filled with tanking, losing, injuries, and not showing up in the big-time playoff games. And this year versus Boston and Brooklyn, it was underwhelming, even more than his past playoff failures. As like very few superstars, Embiid's drop-off, it was just off a cliff. As for the playoffs, he averaged 23.7 points on 43% shooting, compared to the regular season, where he averaged 33.1 points on 54.8% shooting. That overall drop in points per game and efficiency, frankly, it's more than anyone should expect from a superstar player. And when it comes to Embiid, his quote-unquote playoff drop-offs are a theme of his career. And at this point in 2023, heading to 24, I'm tired of the he was hurt excuse, he was sick, he doesn't have enough help, all those excuses. Embiid's 28 years old, he got his MVP. There is quite literally no excuses. As in the past, yeah, he had Ben Simmons, couldn't shoot a lick. That was kind of a valid excuse. But now having James Harden, Maxey, Tobias Harris, PJ Tucker, I mean, Philly wasn't the most talented team in the East, but they had a pretty good squad. And for Embiid standards, at least regular season standards, they played up to par versus Boston. They win that series in 6 games, or in 7. And the worst thing about Embiid constantly flaming out underperforming, he never gets the majority of the blame placed at his feet. As despite winning the MVP, begging to be a top 3 player, top 2 player, and better than Jokic, the main responsibility is never placed at Embiid's feet solely. And in Game 7 versus Boston, getting spanked by 25 points and having a measly 2 points in the second half, that's simply inexcusable. And what makes it worse, after the game, he said, quote, I can't win alone. Me and James can't win alone. That is the ultimate douche teammate move, throwing everyone under the bus. And ironically in Game 7, both Tobias and Maxey, quote-unquote, not enough help, actually outscored Embiid and played pretty decent. And looking at that second half again, of course Embiid had 2 points on 1 of 6 shooting. The MVP in the second half versus Boston, in a Game 7, had as many points as Paul Reed and ranked 7th on his team in scoring for the half. I don't hate Embiid the person, his personality, it's actually kind of funny. What I don't like about him and have disdain for is the theatrics and excuse making that follows every playoff loss post-2018. And the latest Embiid incident in the saga of Joel, he semi-requested a trade, just kind of put the feelers out there and made some pretty bold statements. And look, while he didn't directly say he wants a trade, we're not morons, and you can infer from what he's saying. As when a superstar player, regardless of any city or team or conference, says they want to win a championship with their current team or somewhere else, that's a clear sign that guy isn't exactly content with the team he's on. And for modern NBA standards, these players being much smarter, not demanding trades nearly as often, that's about as close as you get to a modern day trade request. Now, my one big problem with this statement is that Embiid, after failing miserably again, being 28 years old, being a superstar, if you're bailing on this team in large part due to your failures, that's an indictment on your career and a massive black mark on your resume. And of course, after getting some pushback from the media as well as fans, he backtracked, kind of recanted, and said in Philly he wants to be a Kobe Dirk-like figure who plays his entire career with one team. And look, I can respect that in a vacuum, wanting to be on one team for 15 or 20 years. But after you semi-demand a trade, semi-put the feelers out there, you can't put that genie back in the bottle and act like that didn't happen. And for Philly fans, I think they can kind of feel the ground beneath them moving ever so slightly. I think in the next couple of weeks, maybe 3 or 4, that whole team and city is going to implode. Because James Harden, most likely, he's heading west. He's done with Embiid's antics, his playoff choking, and quite frankly, doesn't think this Philly team, as constituted, can win a championship. And I think that the great irony of Embiid and James Harden is, historically speaking, they're actually very, very similar players. They got their MVP, they have their scoring titles. Really, for 5 straight years, they had top 5 rosters. They have some of the biggest playoff choke moments of any superstar of this decade, and there's just one team in their conference they can never beat. For Embiid, that's Boston, and for James Harden, that was the Warriors. Historically speaking, both Harden and Embiid, they're in that tier of great players who are undoubtedly great, but that greatness never really translated to great playoff success. And when it's all said and done, you're going to look at Steph Curry, James Harden, I would say the 2 best guards of the 2010s, maybe the 2020s for a minute, and someone like Embiid and Jokic as the best centers of this decade. And what you're going to have is the clear 1, that being Jokic and Curry, and the clear 2, that being James and Joel. And the sad reality for both those guys, if they don't win a championship, their, legacies, their career-defining moments, they're going to be few and far between. And for Harden, I would say that urgency has been cranked up to an 11. As right now, he's 34 years old, on the edge of his prime, about to exit it. And for Embiid, he's 29, 7 foot tall, 300 pounds, which historically speaking isn't great and doesn't age well going into your 30s. And like you guys know, when it comes to me, I always like looking at things as opposites, kind of looking back at NBA history, and historically speaking, what history tells us. I think that's very, very important. And for someone like Embiid, in contrast to Jokic, his career is on the downslide, maybe plateauing, compared to the Joker, who's riding high and just heading towards top 20 all-time status. And I know Denver's team this year, they had some pretty big losses off-season, with Bruce Brown being their biggest loss. But I don't think betting against the Nuggets next year in the West, I don't think it's a smart bet to make. As if Jokic and Jamal are healthy, that's the engine in the wheels for this team to make it back to the NBA Finals, at the very least, the West Finals. As like we saw this year in the playoffs, on any given night, they're 55 points, unselfish guys who in crunch time always show up. Looking at that duo as a 2-man tandem, maybe they're not the best, most talented duo, but in terms of a tandem, point guard and center, it's pretty unique for 2023 and NBA history standards. As looking at the Western Conference, even the East, there's not really a point guard center combo that rivals those two guys. And being a little superstitious, after you win a championship, you climb that mountain. The after effect of that the following year, it can be very, very positive or negative. I think Denver's after effect will be largely positive, as heading into next year, they're the top dog, they're the best in the West, and the best in the NBA. And heading into the playoffs, having to dethrone the NBA champions, that mental hurdle, that's a real thing teams struggle with. And looking past 2024, on to the end of the decade, I think Jokic's game actually is going to age semi-gracefully. The only big question I have is his weight, as well as his conditioning. If he keeps those two things under control, when he's 33, 34, 35 plus, at the worst, he's going to be Bill Walton on the Celtics or Sabonis on the Blazers. And like both those players, when you can score out of the post, pass out of the post, that's a unique skill that not many bigs have. Now, looking past Jokic, the main topic of this video was of course Joel Embiid and James Harden. And like I said numerous times, these two players aren't my favorite players. I have respect for them, but their careers are eerily similar and they're parting ways at the exact same time. Compared to Jokic and Murray, who are going the opposite direction, raising their ceiling, raising their legacy, winning a championship, if not championships, in the next 3 to 4 years are only going to get better. That contrast in teams and legacies, it's pretty fascinating. And for 2024, I'm just hoping, just cross your fingers, when Philly plays Denver, Joel Embiid doesn't duck Jokic like he did last season. As always, thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time.